Hi, my name is Dilys Brooks, and I am the Associate Campus Chaplain at Loma University. Today, I want to talk to you about something that I'm very passionate about and that's dear to my heart, and it's prayer. My favorite story about prayer is found in the book of 1 Samuel chapter 1, and I want to read the verse that I'll focus on. It's 1 Samuel 1, verse 11. And she made a vow saying, Lord Almighty, if you will only look on your servant's misery and remember me and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head. So that verse is Hannah's anguished cry to God to hear her prayer. Have you ever prayed for something for a long time, wanted it, and watched other people get the answer to your prayer and wondered if God is hearing you, if your prayer is hitting a ceiling and just falling back down? It seems Hannah felt that way. The book of 1 Samuel begins with the description of Hannah being the well-loved wife of Elkanah, a Levite, who was barren for many, many years. And as it was his right in the ancient Near East, he took a second wife because it was children that continued the work of the family. And so Elkanah took a second wife by whom he had several children. And the second wife wasn't so nice with her brood of children. And Hannah often felt not heard by God, not loved. And back in those days, barrenness was seen as a consequence of sin, as a judgment from God. And Elkanah would often say to his wife, really, Hannah, am I not worth more to you than 10 sons? Because he truly loved Hannah. And yet the Bible tells us that Hannah was so sickened by this desire to be a mother, to have her own baby nursed at her breast, to have the experience of feeling that baby grow in her womb, that when she went to worship at Shiloh, one time she just fasted. And as the family was rejoicing, she got up and went into the temple, fell before God, cried out to him and said, if you would just remember me, Lord, I will give you the fruit of my womb, this child, and I will create this whole Nazirite vow. I will commit him to you. When Hannah cries out to God, she cries out to him. In the Hebrew, it says, Lord Yahweh Sabaoth. It's God, the head of the army. She calls out to him as this mighty warrior God. It's like she's saying, fight for me, God. Do this for me. Have you ever felt like God just doesn't hear you? When Hannah says this, she is willing to give up what she most desires before she receives it. Sometimes the things we ask God for, he doesn't answer because he knows it'll become an idol. He knows that once we receive this thing that we're begging and asking for, we may turn away from him. And he allows us to go through this process of crying out, and it seems an unanswered prayer, until we learn to love he who gives the prayer than the answer to the prayer. Now, what's interesting about this is that Eli, the priest, is in the temple, sees Hannah crying out to God, but her lips are moving and there's nothing coming from them. He thinks she's drunk. He challenges her and says, why do you keep drinking, woman? Why are you in here drunk? And she says, oh, no, I'm not drunk. I'm just so overwhelmed by what I'm asking of God, and I'm crying out to God, and I want him to hear me. Sometimes God needs us to get to this absolute place where we are willing to lay flat out, to prostrate ourselves, to just say, God, all or nothing. I'm done. I'm surrendered. I'm here before you. And this is what Hannah does. We don't know how long she was married. We don't know just what all the things were that led up to this moment. What we do know is that when she got here to the end of herself and was willing to give up what she most desired, it was then that God heard. Here's a funny thing about prayer with God. It's one thing to ask him, another thing for him to remember and answer. Then it's something else for us to keep our end. Have you, like me, prayed and said to God, if you get me out of this situation this one last time, I promise I'll never, ever, ever end up here again, and then found yourself there again? Because I've done it. Have you ever said to God, Lord, if you just answer this prayer for me, this is what I'm going to do, and then not do it at all? Have you ever found yourself being angry at God because he didn't answer? So you pray those, I'm here, I'm praying because I'm supposed to pray, but you really know that I'm mad at you, God. What I love about God is no matter how we are in our prayer, no matter where we are, he's still available to listen. And what Hannah says to him is, remember me. And Hannah's story reminds us that no matter how badly we feel about our prayers not being answered, no matter where we are in our walk with God, that he does remember and he does hear, and he will answer when we're ready to acknowledge that he is Yahweh Sabaoth. He is the God who fights for us. He fights against Satan, and he fights against the stuff in us, ourselves, our generational stuff we get from our families. So God hears Hannah's prayer. He remembers her. The Bible says that her husband knew her and she was pregnant. And when that boy came forth, she named him Samuel as a memorial to the fact that God had remembered and heard her. She weaned him, and then she surrendered him to God in Eli's care when he was about 4 years old. When she gives him up, she declares through her prayer this amazing song in 1 Samuel chapter 2 about how good God is and how he vindicated her barrenness by opening up her womb. And she surrenders this child to God. Well, if you read further in 1 Samuel chapter 2 and go on with the story, you realize that in her giving up her son, she walks away. God opens her womb. She has more children. She continues to visit this son, and this son is actually the last prophet in Israel, because after Samuel, there came a king. So what do we do with prayer? We persevere, we pursue, we go after God. We languish, we lay out before him what we most desire. And then when we receive it, we should give it away. Why? Because in the giving up and the surrendering of what we most want, when we let it go, God can then pour more into us. So I want to encourage you. I don't know what you're looking for. My husband and I were married for 10 years, and we desired to be parents. And it seemed as if God was not hearing that prayer. And part of the process of me getting to where I am now, the parent of 2 children, was the willingness to surrender my desire to be a mother more than anything. Because what God wanted from me was to live a life of absolute, complete surrender, where he was my boss, where he drove the car, and I didn't tell him the direction and how fast or how slow, where I didn't tell him which exit to get off or where I wanted to make pit stops. And when I had gotten to the place of complete surrender, where I said to God, you want me to be a minister of the gospel? I'll do it. You want me to preach the gospel? I'll do it. And when I had to choose between being a mother, a birth mother of my own children, and preaching the gospel, I found myself saying to God, if this is what you want, I'll do it. I surrender completely. You can have my life. I will go where you want me to go. I'll preach wherever you want me to preach. I'll teach what you want me to teach, Lord God. And if you choose to bless me with children, thank you. If you don't, thank you. Lo and behold, my last semester of seminary, my graduation gift from the Lord was pregnancy. I was pregnant with our first child. And his name is a memorial of that experience. He is Micah, which means who is a God like Yahweh. Asher, which means blessed or happy. We named him a Yoruba name, which is Oluwagbotemi, which means God has answered and continues to answer, as a reminder to his father and I that he is the child we prayed for, and in Hannah-like fashion, God remembered us. Well, I was a little greedy. I said to the Lord, so can I get a second one? And we waited 2 years and we tried again, and we did get a second child, and her name is Matea, which means my people are of God. Amiel, which means a gift of God. Her third name, Oluwafikayomi, which means God is added to my joy. And she truly lives up to her name. She is a joyful child to be with. Both of our children are testimonies to my husband and I that God does hear and answer prayer. Sometimes, though, the things we ask for, we must be willing to surrender. So Mike and Matea are in our custody. For how long, you ask? I'm glad you asked. They are with us so that we can help them recognize who their true father is. Because one day, and we hope really soon, their father will call them just as Yahweh Sabaoth called Samuel one night. And it is our prayer that they will say like little Samuel, "Speak, Lord," because we're listening. So I want to encourage you, my friends. Don't stop praying. Keep persevering. Keep talking to God. Keep imploring Him. Prostrate yourself if necessary. Go to Him and show Him your hurts, your pains, your worries, your fears, your greatest desires. And as you are praying, He will show you what you need to surrender. And then sit back and wait. Because one thing I do know, He does remember and He does answer prayer.